And the truth is, Americans had a good, long, hard look at
You're making
Trump.
my point.
Well, no, I'm not.
This is my point.
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm saying you live in a free democratic society with free democratic elections. That's why Trump won in 2016. That's why he lost in 2020, whatever he wants people to think. And that's why he won again in 2024. That is regime change, how it should happen.
We back 73% of the world's dictatorships. The idea that we say, here's the dictator we don't like, we're going to overthrow them, is ridiculous. By any objective standard, Netanyahu is worse than Maduro, and we're not overthrowing him. So the whole conversation is absurd.
In today's video, Kyle Kulinski shuts down Piers Morgan on Piers Morgan Uncensored as a fiery debate breaks out over US interventionism, America First, and political accountability. As Piers Morgan pushes back, Kyle Kulinski challenges the logic behind endless foreign entanglements and double standards at home. So let's dive in and watch how Kyle Kulinski shuts down Piers Morgan on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Okay, Kyle Kulinski, I can see you grimacing through a lot of what Michael was saying there. You said Trump says the US will run Venezuela and he threatens Colombia and Mexico. Arrest this psychotic motherfucker. Before I get you to expand on that thesis, I mean, the point I was making to Dave, if I want to elaborate on where I sit with this, because I've had a bit of time to look at this play out, is you look at Maduro. Everyone thought, my God, this is going to be World War III. Actually, Maduro is going to end up in a New York courtroom and he's been got rid of. Everyone seems to agree that's a good thing for not just the Venezuelan people, but the world. No American troops died in what was an incredibly efficient surgical military strike to get him out of there. And if you have a more compliant leader of Venezuela, albeit part of the same regime, that can probably only be a good thing. If you look at the argument about Greenland, for example, I've been struck by some of the people that I didn't expect to think this was a good idea. It was a British general last week talking about this, saying that from a strategic security point of view, it would make perfect sense for America to have Greenland. And is there a deal to be done? He didn't think invading it was the right thing, and nor do I. But is there a deal to be done with 60,000 people who live in Greenland that could actually improve the security of the United States and the West against the obvious threat from China and Russia and so on? And I can get through the others. Iran, getting rid of the Ayatollah and the mullahs is unquestionably a good thing for the world. It's how you do these things and whether you plan and prepare properly for what follows next that I think are the debatable points. And history says that's normally, unfortunately, been very badly done. But this is what I meant when I said to Dave that I understand the argument. I may not agree with all of it, but I do understand the logic to what Trump is doing here. Do you?
No, because we don't have a right to act like this around the world. We're supposed to be a nation among nations, not a nation above nations. And they used to at least lie to us in the past and say that this is good for the world and we're spreading freedom and democracy. Now they don't even bother to lie. Now it's naked, rank, disgusting imperialism where they say, we're going to take the oil. And the point is that we're going to take the oil. We're going to take the minerals. We're going to take the precious metals. We're doing this for our corporations. We're doing it for the Epstein class, the billionaires. And this, to piggyback on what Dave Smith said, is frankly not what many of the MAGA voters thought they were signing up for. They thought America First actually meant America First. By the way, you also replaced the Maduro regime with the Maduro regime. Congratulations on that. It's also been now a week straight of pro-regime protests. Now you have roving gangs of Venezuelan militias that are kidnapping Americans. But again, I come back to the fundamental point, which is if you sign on to stuff like this, you're saying might makes right and the law of the jungle is back. What you're saying is China has a right to go into whatever smaller country they want and depose the leader and say we're doing it because we can and we have the right to do it and we have bigger guns and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So they're never going to address that fundamental question, which is why do we have a right? Do we actually believe in international law or was that all a joke? Are we rolling the clock back to the 1700s and the 1800s and we're going super primitive style here? And I think the answer to that is yes, they want to go super primitive style.
It's hard to ignore how casually intervention gets framed as competence. History shows that regime change rarely stays surgical. Venezuela has already lived through years of sanctions that worsened shortages and civilian suffering, according to UN reports, long before any leader was removed. Removing one figure doesn't dismantle corruption networks armed groups, or economic collapse overnight. The idea that efficiency equals legitimacy ignores international law, which only permits force in self-defense or with UN authorization. When those rules are brushed aside, instability becomes the predictable outcome, not an unfortunate surprise. What gets missed in pro-empire arguments is the precedent being set. If powerful nations claim the right to topple governments for strategic gain, smaller countries lose any real protection. That logic mirrors the 19th century world that produced endless wars, not stability. Even US intelligence assessments have warned that foreign interventions often strengthen nationalist backlash and empower militias. We saw that in Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan, where power vacuums fueled chaos rather than peace. Kyle's broader point lands because it centers accountability. Polling consistently shows Americans prefer diplomacy over force and want resources invested at home. Endless intervention drains budgets while healthcare, housing, and wages lag behind. Claiming moral authority abroad while ignoring consent undermines credibility. A nation among nations requires restraint, cooperation, and law. Without those limits, strength becomes domination, and domination eventually invites resistance. History keeps reminding us that empires fall when power replaces principle and hubris outruns responsibility every single time globally.
Law goes back to antiquity. It's not some creation of modernity, whether we're talking about the 1700s or the 20th century.
The Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg Tribunal, the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal?
Yes, those exist, but international laws, the jus gentium, goes back to antiquity. However, unfortunately, a lot of our liberal friends think history began a few decades ago.
The League of Nations was useless. It fell apart, and that's why we had the UN. That's why we had the Geneva Convention.
Right, I'm talking about millennia ago,
we looked
not
at
merely
piles of millions
but it's true.
of
Woodrow
dead
Wilson
bodies,
failed
and
with
we
the
said
League of
that's a
Nations.
bad idea. We looked at piles of millions of dead bodies and said that's a bad idea. Let's not do that anymore. Let's actually have a framework and rules and laws. And Trump is blowing that up. By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela. He bombed Yemen and Somalia and Nigeria and Iran. He's threatening Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Mexico. And you sit there the whole time and act like it's okay. Is there anything Trump can do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train, or are you going to tickle his taint for the rest of your fucking life?
No, there have been plenty of Trump policies that I've criticized because he's only right about 99.78% of the time. So the First Step Act, I thought, was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the administration has been very successful. What's your problem? What's your criticism?
Is that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you say
that?
know
that what he's doing in imperialism and you don't care.
I just answered your question. I corrected
Congratulations. You rented your brain to a war criminal, pedophile, rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal, pedophile, rapist? Do you brought up a point? You brought up international law, and you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. Excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity. It's a principle of the jus gentium. And then you said, well, international law has failed because of the League of Nations failure, which I think is actually undermining your argument and proving my point and proving Trump's point, because the liberal internationalism that was established by people like Woodrow Wilson did, in fact, fail, which is why we need to restore an older and more classical conception of the international order, which is precisely what Trump's doing. So I think you've hoisted yourself your own petard. And then you just make a lot of vulgar sort of non sequiturs because you don't have a leg to stand on.
All right, let me bring in...
Let me ask you this question. Hold on, Piers, let me ask him a question real quick. Tell me the name of the Minister of Defense in Venezuela.
I don't know. Whatever his name is.
And that's the problem, is that you're advocating for a regime change. You don't know the first thing.
I didn't. I just said the opposite. I argued against a regime change.
He actually said the opposite. I heard Michael Knowles.
I just want to correct something.
You said I'm arguing for a regime change. The regime remains there, right? So he said the opposite, in fact. I want to bring in Coleman.
No, but he wanted to take out Maduro. Don't give me that cutesy little BS.
Yes, but he made the point that the regime is still... He made the point the regime is still there, and the vice president appears to be much more compliant with running Venezuela the way America would prefer for its national security than Maduro. So that's what Michael said. He didn't advocate regime change. Let me bring in Coleman Hughes. Coleman,
kidnapping the president is not
hang on, Carl. Let me bring in
regime change.
Coleman.
This highlights how casually power gets excused when it wears power. International law isn't some fragile liberal experiment. Scholars trace just war principles back to Roman and medieval thinkers, precisely to limit conquest. After World War II, those limits weren't idealism but survival, built because unrestricted force produced catastrophe. When leaders ignore those norms, civilian deaths rise, alliances fracture, and retaliation becomes more likely. History shows that stability comes from rules everyone follows, not from whichever strongman claims on his side. What Kyle's perspective reflects is public fatigue with endless intervention. Pentagon studies have shown military action often strengthens extremist recruitment rather than suppressing it. Trillions spent overseas since 2001 could have funded universal healthcare or modernized infrastructure at home. Meanwhile, interventions justified as precision frequently rely on faulty intelligence, later acknowledged in declassified reports. Supporting restraint isn't weakness, it's recognition that accountability and diplomacy save lives and resources. Conservative skepticism of empire used to exist, and ignoring that history contradicts claims of realism. The real divide here isn't left versus right, but accountability versus loyalty. When pundits defend everything a leader does, debate collapses into branding. Kyle's side resonates because it asks a basic question voters still care about. Who benefits? Data from watchdog groups show defense contractors and extractive corporations consistently profit after interventions, while ordinary people pay the cost. Calling that out isn't radical, it's democratic. A nation serious about law must apply it to itself first or risk repeating mistakes of past empires.
Because I think Xi would have looked at Ukraine and thought, well, what's America actually done to stop Putin
Piers,
taking as much as he can?
Do you think that international law is going to limit Chairman Xi?
Well, no, I don't actually. I do
think
the concept of international law has been twisted and torn apart so badly that I'm actually uncertain what it really means anymore. Because people don't seem to... I mean, if you look at what Israel's done in Gaza, I would say they've trampled over international law with utter impunity, and they don't care.
Reasonable minds can differ, but I agree that's a good point on the
no, they can't.
Murkiness of international law.
Yeah, okay, Kyle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I find this whole conversation preposterous because the idea that we're the moral arbiter of anything is honestly laughable. Trump is himself a criminal. He was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He's covering for a billionaire pedophile cabal as we speak. We armed and funded a genocide in Gaza. We also armed and funded a genocide committed by Saudi Arabia in Yemen. If there's any country on earth where there's some semblance of a sound argument to do regime change, it's our regime being changed. So I don't want to open the door to this might makes right, law of the jungle nonsense. And everybody else except Dave, seemingly on the panel, is in favor of that. And
America has a mechanism. Carl, hang on. America has a mechanism for regime change. It's called the election every 4 years. And the truth is, Americans had a good, long, hard look at...
You're making my point.
Well, no, I'm not.
This is my point.
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm saying you live in a free democratic society with free democratic elections. That's why Trump won in 2016. That's why he lost in 2020, whatever he wants people to think. And that's why he won again in 2024. That is regime change, how it should happen.
We back 73% of the world's dictatorships. The idea that we say, here's the dictator we don't like, we're going to overthrow them, is ridiculous. By any objective standard, Netanyahu is worse than Maduro, and we're not overthrowing him. So the whole conversation is absurd. We're in no position to be the world police or the moral arbiters. In fact, Trump himself literally says, this is about the oil. It's about the natural resources. It's about stealing that for the corporations and the billionaires. So the whole conversation about
I think it could be. I actually think I think Venezuela can be about a number of things at the same time. That's why I think nuance is an important factor in these things. It can be
but
part.
That's the
hang on, Kyle. Can it just be pointed out?
It can be about oil. It can be about oil. It can be about Maduro being a gangster. It can be about a number of things.
This exposes a gap between swagger and reality. Power projection sounds decisive on TV, but history shows strikes rarely deliver the leverage promised. After the Iraq invasion, US intelligence assessments admitted deterrence collapsed and rivals adapted. China studied asymmetric responses. Russia leaned into deniability. That matters because credibility comes from consistency, not spectacle. When international rules look optional, smaller states hedge arms races grow and conflicts harden. That's why skepticism toward moral policing isn't cynicism, it's prudence grounded in outcomes over long horizons. Kyle's side resonates because democracy at home contradicts regime change abroad. Data from human rights groups show the US supports a majority of authoritarian governments for strategic reasons, undermining claims of principle. Elections are the legitimate mechanism for change. Bombs aren't. When leaders say it's about resources, voters hear honesty stripped bare. The pattern fuels blowback, sanctions evasion, and civilian harm, while defense contractors profit. Pointing that out isn't anti-American, it's pro-accountability, and long-term stability suffers as trust erodes globally fast today. Piers frames elections as proof of virtue, but consistency matters internationally too. If law applies selectively, it stops being law. Scholars note that weakened norms invite great power opportunism, not peace. Taiwan, Ukraine, and Gaza all show deterrence hinges on legitimacy as much as force. Kyle's posture reflects restraint, not retreat. Invest in diplomacy, enforce rules evenly, and prioritize lives over leverage. That approach doesn't promise glory, but it reduces escalation and protects democratic credibility for the long run amid volatile global politics today. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.